Silent wishes. The alarm blared at precisely 5:30 a.m., though Priya Sharma had been awake for 20 minutes already, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment. Today marked 27 years since she'd entered the world, though no one would know it. Her birthday had always been a whispered secret, something acknowledged with a quiet nod from her grandmother years ago, but never celebrated. Just another Thursday, she murmured, silencing the alarm and sliding out from under her worn comforter. The morning routine was familiar. Shower, dress, apply minimal makeup, and twist her dark hair into a neat bun. The small calendar on her refrigerator had every important work deadline meticulously noted in different colored pens. Today's date, April 15th, remained unmarked, just an ordinary square among 30 others. Priya had joined Meridian Design Studios 3 months ago as a junior graphic designer. The creative agency was everything her previous workplace wasn't: innovative, respected, and filled with opportunity. Yet she still felt like an outsider, carefully maintaining the professional boundaries she'd built around herself like armor. The subway ride downtown was crowded as usual. Priya clutched her portfolio case to her chest, mentally reviewing the presentation she needed to deliver that afternoon. The birthday thoughts drifted in occasionally, but she pushed them away with practiced ease. 27 wasn't special, anyway, just numbers on a calendar. Morning? She nodded to the receptionist as she badged into the sleek office space. A few colleagues waved from their desks, but most were already immersed in their screens, headphones in place. Priya, can you look at these mock-ups before the client call? Derek, her team lead, barely looked up from his monitor. Of course, she replied, settling at her desk and booting up her computer. This was comfort: the work, the focus, the clear expectations. Lunchtime came and went. Priya ate her homemade rice and lentils at her desk, scrolling through her phone. A single text from her grandmother appeared. Happy birthday, child. Stay strong. Those 5 words were more acknowledgement than she'd received in years. Conference, room in 10, Derek announced to the team. Jensen account review. The meeting dragged longer than expected. The creative director picked apart their designs, forcing them to rethink the entire campaign. By the time they emerged, it was nearly 6, and the office had begun to empty. Drinks at Marlowe's, someone suggested. A chorus of agreement followed. Priya, you coming? Derek asked, already shrugging on his jacket. She shook her head with a practiced smile. Deadline for the Westfield project. You all go ahead. The truth was, she couldn't bear the thought of sitting in a noisy bar, pretending to enjoy herself while the weight of the day pressed against her chest. Better to stay, to lose herself in work until the day was officially over. The office grew quiet. Through the glass walls of the executive suite, she could see the lights still on. Rumor had it that Aidan Thorne, the founder and CEO, rarely left before midnight. In 3 months, she'd glimpsed him only twice. A tall figure with serious eyes and a reputation for brilliance matched only by his aloofness. At 8:30, Priya's stomach growled in protest. She unwrapped the small cupcake she'd bought herself that morning, a tiny concession to the day. No candle, no wish, just a moment of acknowledgement between herself and the universe. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. She froze when she saw the sender. Aidan Thorne. The subject. Line read simply, "Your designs." Heart-pounding, she opened it. "Ms. Sharma, please bring your portfolio for the Westfield campaign to my office immediately. A." Thorne. Priya stared at the screen, panic rising. Had she made a mistake? Was her work not good enough? On today of all days, the last thing she needed was criticism from the company's intimidating founder. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her designs and made her way toward the executive suite, unaware that her carefully constructed walls were about to meet their match in a man who saw far more than she ever realized. Ordinary day, extraordinary encounter. Priya's knuckles rapped softly against the frosted glass door. The nameplate gleamed under the hallway lights. Aidan Thorne, CEO. Her portfolio clutched tightly against her chest. She tried to steady her, breathing. "Come in," a deep voice commanded from within. The office was unexpectedly modest for someone of his stature, spacious but functional, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's glittering skyline. Minimalist furniture in shades of charcoal and navy complemented the modern aesthetic. What stood out were the walls, adorned not with accolades or photographs with celebrities as rumored, but with framed artwork from campaigns the company had created over the years. Aidan Thorne sat behind a sleek desk, his attention fixed on a computer screen. At 38, he had built Meridian Design from nothing into one of the most sought-after creative agencies in the country. His reputation preceded him, brilliant, exacting, and impossibly difficult to impress. He looked up, and Priya was struck by the intensity of his gaze. Sharp features framed by dark hair with touches of silver at the temples. He exuded an air of controlled authority. "Ms. Sharma." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit." Priya perched on the edge of the seat, placing her portfolio on the desk. "You wanted to see my Westfield design, sir?" He nodded, leaning back slightly. "I reviewed the preliminary concepts from today's meeting. Derek forwarded them to me." Her stomach tightened. "I understand they didn't meet expectations. I'm already working on revisions." "Actually," he interrupted, "I disagree with the assessment." Priya blinked, certain she'd misheard him. "Your approach is different," he continued, turning his monitor toward her. On the screen was her original design, a concept the creative director had dismissed earlier. "It's subtle, thoughtful. Everyone else went for the obvious angle, but you found something genuine." "Thank you," she managed, unsure how to process this unexpected praise. Aidan stood, walking to a sideboard where a coffee machine hummed quietly. "Would you like some?" "Yes, please," she replied, watching as he prepared 2 cups with practiced movements. "Black?" he asked. "With a little milk, if possible." He nodded, adding a splash to her cup before bringing it over. As he handed it to her, his gaze lingered on her desk through the glass wall, visible from his office, particularly on the small untouched cupcake sitting beside her keyboard. Priya shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny. Something in his expression had changed, softened almost imperceptibly. "The Westfield account is important," he said, returning to business. "They're looking for authenticity, not flash. Your work captures that." He paused. "Tell me why you approached it this way." For the next 20 minutes, Priya explained her thinking, gradually relaxing as she spoke about the design elements she'd incorporated. Aidan listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed a deep understanding of both design principles and human psychology. "You have good instincts," he concluded. "Trust them more." She nodded, gathering her portfolio. "Is there anything else you needed, Mr. Thorne?" He seemed to hesitate, glancing again at her desk visible through the glass. "Actually, there is one more thing." Reaching into a drawer, he withdrew a small box tied with a simple ribbon and placed it on the desk between them. "Happy birthday, Ms. Sharma." The words hit her like a physical force. She stared at the box, then at him, completely speechless. "How did you—" "HR records," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "I make it a point to know certain things about the people who work here." Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the box. "I don't usually celebrate my birthday." "I gathered that," he said quietly. Inside the box was a business card holder made of burnished metal, elegant and practical. Engraved in one corner was a small stylized letter P. "For client meetings," he explained. "I noticed you keep your cards in your portfolio. This is more professional." The gesture was so unexpected, so perfectly calibrated between personal and professional, that Priya felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is very thoughtful." Aidan nodded, his expression unreadable. No one should work alone on their birthday cupcake or not. The perceptiveness of his observation startled her. Had he been watching her? The thought was both unnerving and oddly warming. "It's just a day," she said, the practiced response automatic. "Is it?" His eyebrow raised slightly. Their eyes met, and for a moment Priya felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced before, not pitied or analyzed, but truly noticed. The moment stretched between them until Aiden cleared his throat. "It's getting late. Can I call you a car?" "That's not necessary," she began, but he was already reaching for his phone. "Consider it part of the birthday package," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "The car service has an account with us." 10 minutes later, Priya sat in the back of a sleek town car, the cardholder clutched in her hands. The driver had been instructed to take her directly home, no detours. As the city lights blurred past the window, she found herself replaying the encounter. Why would someone like Aiden Thorne, who barely acknowledged most employees, take note of her birthday? Why go out of his way for a junior designer he hardly knew? More perplexing still was how the simple acknowledgement had affected her. Like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through defenses built over decades. Back in her apartment, Priya placed the cardholder carefully on her nightstand. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder what it might be like to truly celebrate her birthday. To be surrounded by people who cared enough to remember, to matter. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind circling back to that moment, in his office when Aiden Thorne had looked at her not as an employee, but as a person with a story he seemed curious to understand. Behind closed doors, Aiden Thorne's penthouse apartment occupied the top floor of a restored pre-war building in the heart of the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, but tonight, he stood with his back to them, nursing a glass of 18-year-old scotch and replaying the evening's encounter in his mind. He hadn't planned to give Priya Sharma a gift. In fact, he prided himself on maintaining professional distance from his employees, a lesson learned early in his career when misplaced friendships led to difficult business decisions. But something about her had triggered an unexpected response. The apartment phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Only 3 people had this number. "Hello, Eleanor," he answered, recognizing his sister's number. "You remembered." "I'm impressed," his sister's warm voice teased. "Usually I have to remind you twice that it's our monthly check-in." Aiden moved to the kitchen, setting his glass on the marble countertop. "I've been better about marking my calendar lately." "Miracle of miracles. How's the company?" "Growing. We landed the Westfield account." "And how are you?" Eleanor pressed, the emphasis unmistakable. Aiden hesitated. "I'm fine." "Fine is your default answer. Try again." He sighed, knowing his sister wouldn't relent. "I did something unusual today." "Unusual how? Good unusual, or call my lawyer unusual?" Despite himself, Aiden smiled. "I gave an employee a birthday." "Gift." The silence on the other end spoke volumes before Eleanor finally responded. "You, the man who once told me office birthdays were inefficient sentimentality, gave someone a gift? It was professional. A card holder. Uh-huh." He could practically hear her skeptical expression. "And who is this employee?" "A junior designer. Priya Sharma. She's been with us 3 months." 3 months? And you know her birthday? You don't know my children's birthdays? April 17th and September 3rd. He countered automatically. Lucky guess. "So tell me about this Priya." Aiden moved to his home office, waking his computer with a touch. Talented, quiet, graduated top of her class from Parsons, works later than anyone except me. Sounds like someone else I know, Eleanor remarked, but that doesn't explain the gift. The screen illuminated with Priya's personnel file, the same one he'd reviewed earlier that day when the date caught his eye. Under emergency contact was a single name, Leela Sharma, grandmother. No parents listed, no other family. She was working alone on her birthday, he said quietly. No calls, no cards on her desk. Just her and a single cupcake she didn't even touch. Eleanor was silent for a moment. "It reminded you of yourself?" It wasn't a question, and Aiden didn't answer. He didn't need to. His sister was among the few who knew about his childhood. the years after their parents died, when he'd bounced between distant relatives who viewed him as an obligation rather than a child. Birthdays had been administrative dates, nothing more. "She reminds me of someone who doesn't expect to be seen," he finally said. "And you saw her." He closed the personnel file. "It was a simple professional courtesy." "If you say so." Eleanor's tone made it clear she didn't believe him. "But Aiden, it's okay to connect with people. Not everyone will disappoint you like Catherine did." The mention of his ex-fiancée sent a familiar tightness through his chest. Catherine had claimed to love the man but had really wanted the CEO. The status, the connections, the lifestyle. When he'd discovered her true motives 3 weeks before the wedding, he'd ended it immediately and thrown himself even deeper into work. "This isn't about Catherine," he said firmly. "Of course not," Eleanor conceded. "It's about a birthday gift that was purely professional. My mistake." After ending the call, Aiden returned to the windows, watching the city below. Thousands of lights, each representing lives unfolding in their own complex ways. Somewhere, out there was Priya Sharma, perhaps still holding that simple card holder, wondering why the company's reclusive CEO had bothered to acknowledge her birthday. He wondered the same thing. The next morning, Aiden arrived at the office earlier than usual. The cleaning crew was still making their rounds as he made his way to his suite, nodding acknowledgments to the few startled workers who weren't accustomed to seeing him at this hour. Through the glass partitions, he could see that most desks were empty, except one. Priya sat at her workstation, already deeply focused on her monitor, the new card holder prominently placed beside her keyboard. He paused, observing her for a moment. She worked with quiet intensity, completely unaware of his presence. There was something compelling about her concentration, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she leaned closer to examine a detail on her screen. Making a decision, Aiden changed direction and headed toward the break room. 10 minutes later, he approached her desk, 2 coffee cups in hand. "With milk," he said, placing one beside her. Priya looked up, clearly startled. "Mr. Thorne, good morning. I didn't expect early birds," he said with a slight nod. "The Westfield. Revisions?" She nodded, gesturing to her screen. "I incorporated your suggestions while keeping the original concept intact." "May I?" he asked, indicating the chair beside her desk. For the next 30 minutes, they discussed the design in detail. Aiden found himself impressed not just by her technical skills, but by her thoughtfulness, the way she considered the emotional impact of each visual element, the subtle psychology behind her color choices. "You understand that design isn't just about aesthetics," he observed. "It's about communication, connection. That's why I became a designer," she admitted. "Words didn't always come easily to me growing up, but visual language, that made sense." It was the first personal detail she'd volunteered, and Aiden found himself curious for more. "Where did you grow up?" "A small town upstate. Very small." Her tone suggested there was more to the story, but she didn't elaborate. Before he could decide whether to probe further, his phone buzzed with a reminder of his 8:30 meeting. "I should go," he said, rising. "But this is good work, Ms. Sharma. I'd like you to present it directly to the Westfield team tomorrow." Her eyes widened. "Me? But Derek usually handles client presentations." "Derek didn't create this concept. You did." He paused at the edge of her desk. "Unless you don't feel prepared?" Something flickered in her expression, determination pushing through uncertainty. "I'll be ready." As he walked away, Aiden felt an unfamiliar sensation, a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The simple act of challenging her, of seeing that spark of confidence emerge, had somehow shifted something in his own carefully ordered world. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Aiden Thorne was curious about someone else's story. And more surprisingly still, he found himself wondering if perhaps it was time to re-examine his own. Small gestures, big changes. 3 weeks had passed since Priya's birthday, and the rhythms of Meridian design had subtly shifted. After her successful presentation to the Westfield team, where her concept had been unanimously approved. Priya found herself included in more high-profile projects. Colleagues who had barely noticed her before now sought her input, and Derek had grudgingly acknowledged her talent during the last team meeting. But the most significant change was invisible to everyone except Priya herself, the quiet evolution of her interactions with Aidan Thorne. It began with coffee. After that first morning, she'd occasionally arrive to find a cup waiting on her desk when she came in early. No note, no explanation needed. Sometimes he would appear beside her workstation, asking questions about her progress or offering observations about a design challenge. Their conversations remained predominantly professional, yet each exchange seemed to reveal another layer beneath their carefully maintained exteriors. Today, Priya arrived at 7:30 to find not only the usual coffee, but a folded note beside it. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural. Rooftop, 1 p.m. Bring your sketchbook. She spent the morning distracted, wondering what awaited her. By the time she took the private elevator to the building's rooftop garden, an area rumored to exist but rarely accessed by regular employees, her curiosity had built to nervous anticipation. The elevator doors opened to reveal an unexpected oasis. Carefully tended plants created natural divisions among seating areas, while a pergola covered in climbing vines offered shade over a central table. Aidan stood near the edge, looking out over the city, his usual suit jacket absent, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He turned at the sound of her approach. "You came." "Your note didn't sound optional," she replied with a hint of the dry humor she'd gradually allowed herself to show around him. The corner of his mouth lifted in what she now recognized as his version of a smile. "Fair point. I wanted to show you something." He led her to the table under the pergola where architectural drawings were spread out, plans for what appeared to be a complete redesign of Meridian's office space. "We're expanding," he explained, "taking over the entire 17th floor. I've been working with architects on the layout, but something's missing." He gestured to the plans. "The functionality is there, but not the feeling, not the identity." Priya studied the drawings. "You want me to work on this?" "I want your perspective. Everyone else is thinking about maximizing desk space or arguing over the size of the conference rooms." He looked at her intently. "You see things differently." The trust implicit in his request wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just another design task, this was shaping the physical embodiment of the company he'd built. "May I?" she asked, reaching for a pencil. For the next hour, they worked side by side, Priya sketching ideas while Aidan asked questions that pushed her to articulate her reasoning. She proposed curved elements to break up the linear office layout, suggested areas designed for collaborative creativity, alongside spaces for focused individual work. "The design should tell a story," she explained, warming to the subject. "When clients and employees move through the space, they should feel Meridian's values without needing them spelled out." Aidan watched her hands as she sketched, her movements, becoming more confident as she elaborated on her vision. "And what are those values in your view?" The question made her pause. 3 months ago, she would have recited the company mission statement verbatim. Now, she considered more carefully. "Innovation balanced with thoughtfulness," she said finally. "The courage to break conventions, but the wisdom to know which ones matter. And," she hesitated before adding, "seeing what others miss." Their eyes met, and Priya knew they were both thinking about more than office design. "Yes," he said simply. "That's exactly it." They broke for lunch, a simple meal Aidan had arranged to be delivered to the rooftop. As they ate, the conversation gradually shifted from professional to personal. "The Westfield campaign launches next week," he noted. "Your first major project as lead designer. How does it feel?" "Terrifying," she admitted, "but in a good way." "The best accomplishments usually start with terror," she smiled at that. "Is that how you felt when you started Meridian?" He considered the question, setting down his fork. "Abject panic would be more accurate. I was 26, using my parents' life insurance money and working out of a converted garage." This was new information. Aidan rarely spoke about Meridian's early days and never about his parents. "What made you take the risk?" she asked. Necessity partly. I'd been fired from my third agency job in 2 years. Her surprise must have shown on her face because he gave a short laugh. Hard to believe I wasn't always diplomatic with clients or colleagues or anyone, really. He looked down at his water glass. My sister says I had authority issues back then. What changed? I became the authority, he said with a wry smile. Then, more seriously, and I learned that building something meaningful requires more than talent. It requires connection. The word hung between them, layered with meaning. What about you? He asked, changing the subject. What brought you to Meridian? Priya carefully placed her napkin beside her plate. Your reputation, not just for creative excellence, but for integrity. I'd worked at places where that was lacking. Your previous employer, Phillips and Gray. It wasn't a question. She looked up, startled. You know about that? I did my research when we hired you. They have a certain reputation. Priya felt heat rise to her cheeks, remembering the toxic environment she'd endured for 2 years. The undermining comments, the stolen ideas, the inappropriate behavior she'd been expected to tolerate as a junior designer. I stayed too long, she admitted. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, proved myself more, that some people would suddenly develop ethics. Aiden shook his head. Their loss was our gain. The simple validation in his words meant more than he could know. As they cleared the table, Aiden hesitated before asking, Your grandmother, she's your only family? The question caught her off guard. Yes, my parents died when I was young. My grandmother raised me. She paused, wondering how much to reveal. We didn't have much. Birthdays, holidays. They weren't priorities. Survival first, he said quietly. Yes, she looked at him curiously. How did you know? Familiar territory. He didn't elaborate further, but something in his expression told her he understood from experience, not observation. As they rode the elevator back down to the office floors, Priya found herself studying his profile, seeing beyond the successful CEO to glimpses of the person beneath, someone who perhaps carried his own well-concealed scars. The elevator doors opened at the main office level. Before stepping out, Aiden turned to her. Thank you for your insights today, he said formally, as if consciously stepping back into his professional role. Then more quietly, and for sharing part of your story? Priya nodded, equally aware of the shift. Thank you for listening. Returning to her desk, she found herself pausing to look at the card holder he'd given her on her birthday. Such a small object, yet it had somehow become the catalyst for everything that followed. Not just the opportunities at work, but these tentative steps toward a connection she hadn't realized she was missing. For the first time since joining Meridian, Priya felt herself beginning to belong, not just to the company, but to a narrative larger than herself. A story still unfolding, one careful conversation at a time. Celebrating life. The autumn sky stretched clear and brilliant over Central Park, trees blazing with crimson and gold against the blue. 6 months had passed since that April birthday, transforming not just the seasons, but the lives intersecting within them. Priya checked her watch, then scanned the park entrance. She was early, as usual. The Westfield campaign had exceeded all expectations, leading to her promotion to senior designer. Her workspace had moved to the newly renovated floor, a design that incorporated many of her suggestions from that day on the rooftop, and her confidence had grown alongside her responsibilities. But the most profound changes weren't professional. They were the quiet transformations that had occurred between her and Aiden Thorne, unfolding through conversations that gradually ventured beyond design concepts and business strategies into the territories of hopes, fears, and the histories that had shaped them both. She spotted him approaching along the path, more casually dressed than she was accustomed to seeing him, dark jeans and a charcoal sweater replacing his usual tailored suit. He'd suggested this Saturday meeting with characteristic brevity, Central Park, Bethesda Terrace, 10 a.m. Nothing work-related. You found it, he said when he reached her, his expression warming in the way she'd come to recognize was reserved for their private conversations. I've lived in this city for 3 years and never visited this part of the park, she admitted. Then, you've been missing out. He gestured toward the path. Shall we? They walked in comfortable silence, following the winding trail past the iconic fountain. The park was alive with weekend visitors, families with children, joggers, artists sketching. The scenery, yet somehow it felt as if they occupied a space just slightly apart from the bustle. I've been meaning to ask, Aiden said as they descended a set of stone steps. How did the meeting go with Leela, your grandmother? Priya smiled, remembering the previous weekend. After months of gentle encouragement from Aiden, she had finally visited her grandmother, bringing not just the usual groceries and necessities but also the photographs of her work that she'd always been too hesitant to share. Better than I expected, she answered. She didn't understand everything about what I do, but she was proud. She kept the Westfield magazine advertisement to show her friends. Family pride is powerful, Aiden observed. Even when it comes unexpectedly, they found a bench overlooking the lake, watching as rowboats glided across the water's surface. Speaking of unexpected, Priya said, reaching into her bag. I have something for you. She handed him a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Aiden looked at it with surprise. What's this for? Just open it, she urged. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook, its cover embossed with a design she had created herself, an abstract pattern that subtly incorporated elements from Meridian's most successful campaigns, including shapes from her own Westfield design. I noticed your current one is almost full, she explained as he examined it. And I wanted to thank you. He ran his fingers over the embossed pattern. For what exactly? For seeing me, she said simply. When I was doing everything possible to remain invisible. Aiden was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Do you know why I noticed your birthday? She shook her head. It's the same day my parents died. 23 years ago. He looked out across the lake. I was 15. Car accident. Eleanor was 18, about to leave for college. Instead, she had to decide whether to let me go into foster care or try to become my guardian. Priya felt the weight of this revelation, understanding how significant it was that he was sharing it with her. What did she choose? She fought for custody, deferred college, worked 2 jobs. His voice held deep admiration. She was barely an adult herself, but she kept us together. That explains a lot about you, Priya said softly. He turned to her, curious. What do you mean? Why you built Meridian the way you did? Why integrity matters so much to you? Why you notice the details others miss? She paused. And maybe why you recognize something in me that day? Aiden nodded slowly. April 15th has always been complicated. Each year I acknowledge it privately, remember them. Then I work until I can't think anymore. He looked down at the sketchbook in his hands. This year, when I saw the date in your file, something clicked. Then I saw you working late alone with that untouched cupcake and you decided to change the narrative, she finished for him. I suppose I did. He met her eyes. For both of us, the realization washed over her. How a single moment of recognition had created ripples that continued to expand outward, transforming not just her professional life but her sense of self-worth, her willingness to connect, her courage to be seen. I've been thinking, she said after a moment, about birthdays and milestones, how we mark time. And I've decided mine deserves to be celebrated properly this year. A smile touched her lips. 6 months from now, would you consider helping me plan something? Nothing elaborate, just meaningful. The question held layers of meaning they both understood, an acknowledgement of how far they'd come and an invitation to continue the journey. Aiden reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping gently around hers. The gesture was simple but profound, a bridge between their professional connection and something deeper still unfolding. I'd be honored, he said quietly, but on one condition. What's that? That 6 months after that we celebrate another date. His thumb traced patterns on her palm. The day a cupcake changed everything. Priya laughed, the sound carrying across the water. Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? She considered, looking out at the autumn splendor surrounding them, the vibrant colors that had once been tightly closed buds, now fully expressed in their brilliance. The beginning, she said finally. Not just of us, but of believing that some days and some people are worth celebrating. As they sat together, hands entwined, Priya reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the lonely woman who had once marked her birthday with silence, to someone who could now embrace not just celebration, but connection. From the aloof CEO who had used work to avoid pain, to a man willing to share both his scars and his hope. It wasn't just about birthdays anymore. It was about the courage to be seen, fully and honestly. About recognizing that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as ordinary moments. A cupcake acknowledged, a story shared, a hand held on an autumn day. And perhaps most importantly, it was about understanding that healing rarely happens in isolation. It unfolds in the spaces between people brave enough to reach across their carefully constructed boundaries and say, in ways both spoken and silent, you matter. Your story matters, and together we can write a new one. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light across the water, Priya and Aiden began walking again, their path forward uncharted but no longer separate, two stories merging into one narrative, filled with possibilities neither could have imagined on that ordinary April day that had become, in retrospect, anything but ordinary.